Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Soul Survivor Station. It's Joan here. I wanted to share a little uh, about my history. Wanted to share, just tell you a little bit about my background. And, this may help bring some clarity, about my perspective and some of the videos I share on this channel. Um, Firstly, I just wanted to mention that I was married once when I was very young. I mean, I hadn't even hit my 20s yet. And I became a single mom in my early 20s. And since then, I've had very few long-term relationships, uh, mostly very short dating experiences and those relationships. And anyways, I've had the privilege of during those times, and I say privilege because I mean they weren't all bad. Relationships come and they go, and people move on with their lives. And um, I've had during those relationships, I've had the privilege of dating outside of my own race. In fact, the man that I was married to several decades ago was white. And, I've been around men of different backgrounds who I considered good friends. And, a couple of those relationships were brief romantic situations. For the majority of my life, I've been single. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I've asked myself, if I were to marry again, or let's say, for instance, if I decided I wanted to enter into a serious relationship now, knowing, what I know as a spiritual woman who is, who has grown, evolved, and healed through narcissistic experiences, would I actually consider being with someone outside of my race instead of a black man? And based on the lessons that I've learned over the decades, I would honestly have to say that my preference now leans more towards being with a black man. And I want to say something here that, may make some people uncomfortable, especially Black women and Black men. And, I'm saying it from my experience, from my perspective. I'm not saying that it's written in stone. This is just what I have experienced for myself. And, just like you, I am entitled to my opinion. And so in my experience, some white men treated their partners better than some of the black men and or brown men that I've been with. And I say I've actually just been with one brown man. The rest have been either black or white. But my point is that in my observation, the observation that comes from my life, I don't believe that it applies to every person in any group. But I will say that, I'm trying to reiterate here that I'm not saying that all white men are better partners. And I'm also not saying that all black men treat women poorly. I just need to make sure that that's very clear. But what I'm trying to do is look at the bigger picture. And what do I mean by the bigger picture? Here's the bigger picture that I mean, and it has to do with history. History, I think, plays a role. It has an impact, or it can have an impact. The legacy, for example, of, let's say, slavery, when it comes to my people, the legacy of slavery, segregation, systemic exclusion. I believe that those had a tendency to disrupt the family structure as far as access to education and opportunity for not just Black men but Black people overall, for them to learn social and cultural rituals that other people take for granted or had more access to. These disruptions, I believe, can create deep wounds. They can create inner child issues, that pass, across the generations when, especially if they're not, or if they aren't acknowledged or healed. Firstly, they have to be acknowledged before they can be healed. Maybe the best way I can try to illustrate what I'm trying to say is, for example, imagine a young Black boy taken from his family and then forced into slavery, for example. Now, compare his life to a white boy of the same age who had access to school, had access to community rites of passage, and especially like healthy, functional family mentoring. The white boy might learn, for example, he might learn social skills or, emotional expression. And, for example, courtship rituals. I had the thought, like, for example, going to the prom. Now, I don't even know when the whole idea of taking a young man, taking a young lady to a prom, when that all started. Maybe if maybe you can let me know in the comments. But, the things like that I'm referring to, emotional expression and courtship rituals, and those are things that, these types of rituals that the enslaved boy was denied. There's no way that he would have been allowed to do that. He'd be out in the field. So, over generations, those who, those denied opportunities and the trauma of oppression, I guess that's the best word I can use here, oppression, can shape how people relate to themselves and how they relate to other people within the relationship dynamics, for example. So, when I see a Black man who struggles in a relationship, I try to look at the bigger picture here. I try to ask, for example, well, what's the root of that pain? Was there trauma in the family? Did he maybe grow up without models? Look at society today. A lot of single parent homes where there is a Black, let's just say Black children in general. Where are their fathers? At least in North America, anyways. Aren't most of them, a lot of them, many of them, incarcerated? So who is his mentor? So it makes me ask, what's if I see a Black man who's struggling in a relationship, could it be that maybe he grew up without a model, without his father, who would have taught him maybe healthy emotional expression? Another thing to consider is maybe structural barriers could have limited his opportunities to learn and evolve, for example. Those are the questions I wanted, us to consider. And because they point to the causes that we can address together. And I think, I think that as I've tried to express here, I believe that they do impact how Black men relate in, particularly in intimate relationships. Now, I digress and to say that, this is not an excuse for mistreatment, absolutely. But it is an invitation to try to understand. And this is what brought me to, come out of my previous perception of how I view Black men in a relationship, in intimate relationship, and how it has opened my own mindset and changed my own mindset to try to understand. So if we look at, behavior through the lens of history and systems, which is what I'm saying that I have applied, I'm trying, or I'm not trying, but I'm actually applying that to look at relationships, behavior through the lens of history and systems. We can, then move from blaming to healing, and, none of us are perfect. We all make mistakes, and the issue, or it is, the way I look at it is that if a person is willing to change and evolve and grow, even if they find themselves at one point where they were not looking inward, not growing, not changing, it's never too late. You can move from the blame to healing. And that's why, as a Black woman, I choose to approach Black men with, I guess, curiosity. Not I guess, but yeah, that's what it is. It is curiosity and compassion, right? Curiosity and compassion. And what I wouldn't have considered before, this has, again, helped me to expand and to be more open-minded about this bigger picture that I'm now considering, the history, and so I choose to approach Black men with curiosity and compassion. I want to see the whole person. I want to see all of them in terms of how does their history, how could their history apply here? How could their past hurt, pain apply here? And, what could be their potential? I also want to take this opportunity to sort of push back on, some of the harmful narratives that are out there. Media and stereotypes often package Black men in a very negative, narrow ways. And that it doesn't help. In fact, it does, in my opinion, I think it does a lot of damage. And it also shapes how people see themselves, how Black men see themselves and how others treat them. So I think what's key here is awareness. Awareness is the first step towards changing that story. Because if you're aware of it, then you can tackle it. You can, if you so choose, and you want things to improve, and again to grow and to evolve, then it starts with awareness. You cannot fix something that you're not aware of, and so that's my perspective about that. And so once I became aware of it, I started to think, well, how can I change my thought pattern and actually apply that in current relationships or any relationship that is to come. So, I'm speaking again, remind you, from my personal experience. It's not written in stone, and I'm certainly not reading from a textbook. My own family history shaped how I think. It shaped my early choices, for example, I didn't grow up seeing my late father model, healthy relationships. In fact, quite the contrary. And that had a substantial influence on me. But, I'm not here to speak ill of my late father. I think that I learned a lot of what not to do. But, as I've learned more about our history and, the ways trauma passes from one generation to the other, my point of view or my perspective has changed for the better. At least I hope for the better, because I now see, or I now understand my father. I understand his father better, my grandfather, my late grandfather, and the men who came before them in a totally different light. So, think about this. If a black man mistreats a partner, think about asking, well, what's causing that behavior? Was it passed down? Was there, abuse in his family maybe? Is there unhealed trauma reaching back generations, I know one of the things that led to me even considering this discussion is because I'm having to look back at my own pain, at my own history, and consider these very questions. Is it passed down? Is there abuse in my family? What is there, generational curses that needs to be broken? Is there unhealed trauma? And certainly for me, in my case, yes, absolutely a lot of unhealed trauma that has led to these types of questions about myself that I am now considering applying in future relationships or in relationships that, I may not even have thought about before. So, if there are unhealed trauma reaching back generations, then those would need to be looked at. Awareness and healing is part of the solution. I totally believe that awareness has to be there, and then the healing can come in. And together with the awareness and the healing we can dive in, at least tap into how to fix the issue, and even if somebody is in a relationship already, and especially if you're a woman of color and you are in a biracial connection with somebody, these are good topics. They're good discussions to look at. If you find that maybe you've been in a relationship with someone, a white man, and you've been in a relationship with a black man or a brown man, or whatever the case may be, and you see a pattern, consider the bigger picture. Look at the man's history. Look at what could be contributing to who he is overall. So, I realize that some of this may feel or may be uncomfortable for some of you. You may disagree with parts of it. You may disagree with all of what I'm saying, and that's okay. I have no issues with that. What I'm sharing are simply my perspective so that we can have a thoughtful conversation about how the history, particularly the history of our black men, and how past trauma, particularly related to segregation, slavery, things like that, and culture, how that may have, or how that can shape intimate relationships between the races, or between, just whatever relationship he's in. I don't know. I thought it was an interesting topic. So, tell me what you think in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And that was what I came up with for this video. By the way, before I forget, if you leave a comment and I get to see them, trust me, I usually do respond to the comments that I get. So if you make a comment and you don't get a response, it just means I did not see or get that comment from you. So that's just an aside. But in any case, let me know what your thoughts are with regards to this topic of, um, Black men and the bigger picture and how they interact in relationships in general, but particularly in intimate partnerships. Okay? So peace and light to every one of you until next time. Take care.